Hi everyone and welcome to Deep Geek. This is the latest in a series of live streams looking at some of the most interesting, powerful houses in Westeros. Just trying to track through their history and also what's going to be happening going forward with them. And today we have reached House Lannister, which is obviously one of the most fascinating houses, one of the ones that they majored on in the TV show. As always, the way that I'm going to structure this is by framing it around questions I've received from my patrons, but I'm going to try and pick up as many questions as I can from the chat as we're going through. I got quite a few questions from my patrons, so we'll see how we go with this one. But let's start with a bit of an overview, just a little bit of history so we're all on the same page. House Lannister is not one of the original great houses, as it were. They stole what we consider now to be their home, Casterly Rock. Casterly Rock was the home of House Casterly, as you might expect from the name, and then it was stolen, swindled from them by this character called Lann the Clever. Now, Lann the Clever is one of these people from the Age of Heroes. He's a legendary character. George R. R. Martin has warned us many times we shouldn't take the stories literally. They are the equivalent of our myths and legends. There's clearly a grain of truth in them, but we shouldn't take them as literal history. There are lots of different stories about exactly how Lann the Clever might have swindled Casterly Rock away from the Casterlys, but I mean, one of them is him sort of sneaking his way. Lann may well even be female. We do not know. Sneaking his way into the rock, pretending to be ghosts, setting people against each other, assassinating people. One had Lann the Clever covering himself in butter to kind of squeeze through some little cracks just in the rock to get to another place. There's lots of different stories. Some of them are very intriguing, exciting, almost too hard to believe. Some of them are very pragmatic. What we do know is that at some point, the family that came from this original character, Lann, became the Lannisters, and Casterly Rock kept on being called Casterly Rock, but it was the home of House Lannister. And they, over time, they became the kings of the rock, this family passing down from generation to generation. And slowly but surely, they grew in power and influence. Now, part of this was that Casterly Rock, and this sort of frames a lot of our understanding of what the Lannisters are like. Casterly Rock is literally a rock. It's sort of, there's big flattish land around before you get to the mountains, and then there's this sort of rock standing up out of almost nowhere. If you imagine kind of Uluru, Ayers Rock, that kind of feel, it's not quite that dramatic, but it's flat land and then this rock jutting up out of it. The rock looks a little bit like a lion, which is where the Lannister lion comes from, and it's not a castle so much as dug into the rock. Casterly Rock as a home is dug into the rock. Passageways, rooms, everything you need is dug into that rock, and if you go right down to the bottom of it, you find a gold mine. And this is the source of the Lannister riches. It started out getting just a little bit of gold for them, but over time, more and more arrived to the point where when we start the story of A Song of Ice and Fire, they are clearly the richest family in Westeros. Now, the Casterly Rock is, as I say, it's just a rock, a sort of a castle within the rock. Beneath it is Lannisport, which is one of the largest ports in Westeros. It's, if you sort of follow the trade route around the south of Westeros, then after you've done King's Landing, then Planky Town, and you come there's Old Town, and then the next stop around, if you keep on going around, is Lannisport. So a lot of the trading routes go up that far and then turn around and go back around across maybe just all the way across to Essos from there. So it is part of a trading route. It is a place of great craft. partly because of the gold that comes there. There are lots of goldsmiths, they make jewelry, things like that. And this made the Lannisters even more rich because it then became a trading port and all the rest of it. And they slowly, over time, over centuries, millennia, they expanded their realm. It never became massive. It kept largely to what we now think of as the Westerlands, very mountainous kind of area. They occasionally did these forays into what we now think of as the Riverlands or down towards the Reach, but they never overextended themselves until we get to this time of the Targaryen invasion. I should probably say between the beginning and the Targaryen invasion, they kind of merged with the Andals. So the original First Men line, such as it was, got merged with the Andals. Then when the Targaryens arrived, they started out opposing them, trying to fight them off. And then there happened the Field of Fire. The Lannisters were at the Field of Fire when all 3 Targaryen dragons just came and decimated their forces, as well as those of House Gardner. The Lannisters just about survived that and bent the knee and were allowed to carry on being not Kings of the Rock, but Wardens of the West. And that's how they stayed through the Targaryen era. They were one of the great houses. They never reached the absolute heights until the time of Tywin Lannister. We'll get into that element of history in just a moment. But as it stands, they are, at the beginning of the books, they are behind the House Baratheon as the ruling lords, indisputably the most powerful family in the Seven Kingdoms. So that's where it is. It's been a very long, slow rise to power, a lot of downs and some ups again, but they reach there eventually. So that's the sort of the background to House Lannister. Before I went live, I had a couple of super chats. I should probably just say, Ryan Larkin, thank you for the super sticker. I hugely appreciate that. Mara Lee also with a super sticker. Thank you so much. And just saying also a show of love, appreciation and enjoyment for all the fabulous content and stories on both IDG and The Well Told Tale. Thank you for all you do for us patrons and subscribers. Love to Dan. Dan's my dog. Thank you, Mara. You know how much I appreciate all of your support, both here, Patreon, elsewhere. Thank you. I really hugely appreciate that. And I picked up some of your questions for later as well. And Stacey Burke, thank you for your super chat saying, hey, Robert, please share your thoughts on Cersei's feelings for Tommen. She treats him so poorly in the books. Yeah, she does. So Cersei clearly dotes on Joffrey. She's her eldest son, and she clearly treats him as the heir to the throne and all the rest of it. Tommen, however, because he's younger, because he's slightly more sensitive, because fundamentally towards the end of the books that we have, he starts to turn his affections towards Marjorie Tyrell. She doesn't have as strong a relationship with him. Now, when you say what her feelings are, he is her son. So clearly there is a very, very strong bond there. And what they showed in the show very well, I think, was that Cersei, as her children died, so did a lot of her compassion and care for those around her. And that, I think, shows quite how important all of her children are. Yes, Joffrey was her favourite, but Tommen is her child, and she wants Tommen to be king. So that's the sort of the ends of it, I guess. If you were to push it a little further, I think that she wants him to toughen up. I think that she wants him to be like a king, and to not be led by his queen, who she understands has to be Marjorie. That may well change, but she wants him to be more Lannistery. And when she thinks of what Lannistery means, she thinks of what her father was like: strong, uncaring for others, always looking out for House Lannister and putting House Lannister first. That is not what Tommen has been like. So she doesn't view him as what he ought to be. And so she feels that she has to be correcting him and trying to guide him to what he should be, but at the same time she does care about him. So that's the sort of the dynamic going on there. And he's not yet old enough to push back much against her. So if he were to grow up, I don't think he will, but if he were, then that would be interesting to see how that dynamic develops. Okay. I think that's me caught up on the chat. Let's do some questions. Thinking first about the history of the house, let's do some questions about the history of House Lannister from my patrons. Dwight the Merchant says, hi Robert, what do you think is the most likely origin of Lann the Clever? Are the stories of his origins in the Reach or the Westerlands more likely? First Man, Green Man, or Andal? Thanks for the great content. So, as I said, there are lots of different stories about this, and some of the stories are not just suggesting that he was one of the first men a very, very long time ago, but sort of implying that he was an Andal, which suggests maybe that was hundreds, thousands of years later, maybe. We don't know, and we're never going to know for sure. My guess is that he probably was a first man, because the time seems to have been before the Andal invasion, so the Andals weren't really around. I think that probably what happened, as is the way of myths and legends, is that a few different things kind of got merged, and so the joining of House Lannister to the Andals, which is still several thousand years ago, so it's a long time ago, was very clearly a decision that House Lannister is no longer a first men house. Now, this was done by the joining of House Lannister by the female line to an Andal, but keeping the Lannister name, which sounds like a technicality, but basically the Lannisters, the original line through the male line of the Lannisters did end, and the Andals came in, and so it should have been called a new name, but they just retained the name of House Lannister. So you could argue that this was a changing of power every bit as much as it was a changing of power when Lann the Clever took over, because another one of the interpretations is that Lann simply married into the family and then swindled it out from under their hands and changed the name, and so it was under new ownership, not Casterly but Lannister. So my personal take is that this is just a merging of ancient legends. The most powerful ones seem to be about this being a first man rather than an Andal. Rosa Monk, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, hi Robert, your videos have inspired me to begin my first reread of A Song of Ice and Fire. I'm so pleased about that. That always makes me happy when I make people read. Thank you for the great content. My question, hypothetically, do you think Tywin would have made a good king? Well, so just on the reread, I'm going to do a reread. I've realized I've not done this for a while. I'm going to start on a reread of the books. For the last couple of years, I've not been reading them from beginning to end. I've been sort of dipping into them to make videos, choosing bits here and there. But I've decided to do this one, so I'm getting the audio books, and I'm going to go through them from beginning to end by audio, which will be a different way of taking on board the story, which I'm really looking forward to. But in terms of whether Tywin would have been a good king, I think it depends on what you mean by good. Would he have been competent? Undoubtedly. He would have been able to rule the kingdom, keep power, and all of the rest of it. He would have been able to do all of those things. Whether he would have operated well with a Hand of the King is a different matter, because he made an excellent Hand of the King. Hand of the King being in control of the levers, the machinery of government, and all the rest of it. That seemed to be where he excelled. As a king, what do you have to do that is slightly different? Well, you're more of a figurehead as much as anything else. He would be recognizable. People would know who he was, and they would know what he wanted as a leader, where he was taking things, which would definitely have been good. But would he have been morally good? As in, would he have cared for the whole of the kingdom? Would he have cared for the small folk, the people who are most in need? Or would he have prioritized the needs of House Lannister? I mean, I think we know the answer to this. He would have prioritized ensuring that he remained secure in power, and his kin would have remained secure in power after him. That would have been what he was doing. And that would have compromised his ability to rule on behalf of the people as a whole. So good, competent, not necessarily good as in good for the people of the realm, would be my personal take on it. Mod Mary, Hand of the King equals Prime Minister. Broadly, yes. That's the sort of the way that it goes. It's if you're in sort of Tudors and Stuarts territory in English history, then if you think of Henry VIII as being the king, and then he has not a prime minister, but he has his sort of his fixer, his Lord Chancellor, his Hand of the King being Thomas Cromwell, the person who was in charge of legislation and getting things done, and ruled in the king's stead when the king was off doing all sorts of stuff. So that's the kind of feel it is, the person who actually is in charge of the mechanisms of how things are done. And some of the kings were more hands-on than others. Robert Baratheon seems largely to have not wanted to be involved in anything. He just wanted to enjoy his life, enjoy being king. Other kings, Jaehaerys was very hands-on, wanting to be in charge of how the kingdom as a whole was run, setting direction, all the rest of it. So the dynamic changed between king and Hand of the King, but the principle was the same. One was ultimately in charge, but the other ran things in the name of the king. Catherine Furseth saying, Valor live streamist, Robert. Great. How long would you say that House Lannister has been one of the biggest and most important in Westeros? At the time of the start of the Targaryen rule, they were not among the big three, the most important houses. Is their importance related to their wealth alone, since political influence is not necessarily related to wealth, or is Tywin's cleverness and sense for real politics central in their current position? Okay, so the way that I have tried to conceptualize this is that they had a very long and slow and conservative with a small c growth over many hundreds, thousands of years. They never did a huge push for power. They never overextended themselves. They kept control of their area. Now, when we get to the start of the Targaryen era, they are one of the big noble houses. They're not one of the top three most influential. We talk about this a lot. We get Baratheons, Hightowers, and Velaryons, who were there clearly at the center of court life. But if you're thinking next tier down, the Lannisters had aspirations at that time to become part of that crowd. And they clearly were working this angle. They were hosting the Targaryens at times. They were on the small council, things like that. So they were working it. They were slowly going up. But in terms of what happened after the Dance with the Dragons, before Tywin, obviously we get his father Titus, who just let things just slip hugely. They lost control effectively over their own lords, and they lost a lot of wealth, they lost prestige, and it was when Tywin came in and came to power, it was then that they gained again. And he, through his friendship with King Aerys, got himself to be Hand of the King, and then from that moment on, he was always trying to see how could he push and advance the case for House Lannister. How could he get them more influence? Now, you're asking whether this is about related to their wealth or his cleverness. Clearly, Tywin's cleverness did push them up to the next level, his opportunism and his ruthlessness as much as anything else. So he did push them up to the position that they were in, but they were already, through their wealth, through the fact that they actually were in one of the more defendable places in Westeros. There are a lot of places in Westeros you could call defendable, but you'd probably say that Casterly Rock, certainly in the top half of the sort of the capitals there, certainly Highgarden is a lot more easily attacked. Old Town's a lot more easily attacked. A lot of the other sort of places are quite. Pike is more easily attacked. It's up there. It's not quite at the same level as somewhere like the Eyrie or somewhere like that, but it's a good stronghold. Now that has not changed, and their riches allowed them to have the power and influence. The fact that they were the wardens of the West allowed them a certain degree of prestige and influence, and that was their baseline. And then sometimes they had a good leader who pushed them up, and sometimes they had a bad leader who pushed them down. So that's where we're at. And so just before Tywin, they were on the down. Then at Tywin's under Tywin's control, they were on and up. That's the sort of probably the best way to envisage it. Stanford Bridge, thank you so much for the super sticker. I very much appreciate that. And also Brendan, thank you so much as well. I appreciate it. Paladin Pony T asking if Brightraw is gone forever, or will we see it again? I think it is gone forever. I can't see how we're going to come across it. I think I've got a question on this later, so I won't get into too much detail now. But it's in Valyria. The only chance is if this is just a random thing that Euron picked up. But no, people aren't going to go to Valyria, so that we're not going to see it again. But talking of which, Marley says, I believe the Lannisters did once have a Valyrian sword of their own. What do you think happened to it, and did it have a name? Okay, so I'll give the history here. Brightraw was what it was called. It was an ancestral Valyrian steel sword. They presumably bought it from the Valyrians back in the day. Well, I say that. The Valyrians didn't want to sell to them because there was a prophecy, I think it was, that Lannister gold would cause the end of the Valyrian freehold, and so they didn't want to sell to House Lannister. Now, I've got a theory on how they got it. They did this ages ago, but it's linked in with the Doom. But basically, I think that they did spend their gold, and that gold did end up paying for the Doom, but they did get a Valyrian steel sword, which is passed down from generation to generation. Now, what happened was that one of the Lannisters, a guy called Tommen II, headed off rather rashly, it has to be said, to Valyria. Now, Valyria seems to have this kind of cool hold on people for a long, long time because the wealth that was there. Everybody knew it was hugely dangerous. There's a chance he would never return, but he went anyway. So he went off. He took Brightraw with him. He never returned, and Brightraw was gone. So that's what it is. I don't think we're going to see it again. But what it meant was that when Tywin was in control of House Lannister, he saw this as a huge slight on House Lannister, the fact that they didn't have a Valyrian steel sword. He saw, because houses that had them viewed them as this, this was their house's inheritance. This was a sign of their prestige, and the Lannisters didn't have one. And he tried to buy them. Lots of houses, he tried to buy a Valyrian steel sword off of them, but he never could persuade anyone to sell. So I don't think we're going to see it. Incidentally, a Lannister did go hunting for it, Geryon Lannister, who was Tyrion's favourite uncle, I think he described him as. He headed off looking for it. He never returned. So I don't think we're going to see it. And this was also, incidentally, what led to Tywin breaking ice, the Stark sword, down into two, so that House Lannister suddenly had Valyrian steel swords once more. Question from Vera Bennett. Thank you so much, saying, hi Robert, huge love for your content from Melbourne, Australia. Good day. Why do you think Tywin did not remarry after his wife's death in childbirth? Good question. I think the short answer, which for people who've only seen the show, or indeed probably only read the books and without reading some of the background stuff, you only ever get one side of Tywin Lannister. Tywin was not always just this cold, hard, calculating person. He loved his wife, Joanna. It's very clear. It's becomes apparent that, or it's said that she was the only person who could make him laugh. He was always very serious, but clearly around her, he was a different person. And I think that when she died, he saw that, well, he'd got the heirs he needed, so there was no pragmatic reason why he had to have another wife. And he'd lost the love of his life. And it sounds a bit trite to say that about Tywin Lannister, who we view as this great, fearful character. But that seems to be what happened. Why would he marry again? He wasn't going to put himself back in that position where he was going to open himself up to love again. I think that's what it was. And the last vestige of him that had that vulnerability was gone with Joanna's death. So I think he was just heartbroken, is the short answer. And it's not a long or detailed one, and I wish that there were more to it, but I think it's actually as simple as that, which, when you think about it, though, does add a slightly more tragic element to Tywin's story, is that he was who he was, not just because he was a big, nasty, horrible person, but because his heart had been broken and he didn't have anyone who loved him anymore. And he didn't think that he could love anymore, maybe. I don't know. But it adds another layer in there. Anyway, Mara Lee, thank you so much for the super sticker. I hugely appreciate it, saying you were amazing. Thank you. That's very kind. Questions from my patrons. Let's go to Jared, saying, hello Robert, my question regarding the Lannisters concerns the upcoming House of the Dragon series. Do we know anything about the Lannisters during this time period? What parts do you think they will play in the series? Are they black or green? So the House of the Dragon is the Game of Thrones spin-off. It's going to be a prequel series. It's going to be set in the Dance of the Dragons, which is 150 or more years before A Song of Ice and Fire. Targaryen civil war, effectively. The entire continent had to pick sides in this really quite techie debate about who was the real and true heir to the Iron Throne, and it was more about power than anything else. But the Lannisters had to pick a side, and they picked the Greens, which were the Alicent Hightower's side. Now, it's probably worth saying up front that no one won. the Dance of the Dragons. So yes, they were on one side, not another, but everybody lost at the end of it. So it wasn't a matter of if you supported one side and that side lost, then your house was wiped out. House Lannister had big losses as a result of this. They lost an army, they lost their lord, they lost a lot of prestige, but everybody did. It was bad for the entire continent. We will, however, probably see one character, a guy called Tywin Lannister. Now, he was master of coin for the Greens. So when you had this council, the way that whole thing, it's written about in Fire and Blood. It's a fascinating little excerpt. You get the old king dies, and then there's this succession crisis. But for a couple of days or so, while the old king is dead, Alicent Hightower, her father, Otto, and their proto-small council all sort of gather together, don't tell anyone that the king is dead, and they try to figure out what to do. And part of this group that is there is this guy called Tywin Lannister. So we almost certainly will see him in the show. And he's quite interesting because as Master of Coin, he immediately tries to work out how do we protect all of this money, the crown's money, because it's they were the people in control. They had King's Landing, and they had access to all the king's money. Rhaenyra and her group, the Blacks, they were off on Dragonstone. They didn't have access to any of this. So the Greens started with all the power, and they needed to figure out ways to maintain that. So Tywin Lannister came up with this clever plan to split the money into, I think it was 4 different parts. One part went over, they invested it in the Iron Bank of Bravos. Another part went down to Old Town. Another part went to Casterly Rock. And the last part, the last quarter, they used to be spending on troops and bribes and whatever else they needed for the war. And he was in charge of all of that. And then he was there when King's Landing was taken by the Blacks. He was there, and then they go, well, where's all the money gone? And so he then is captured, and he's tortured to try and find where the money is. And that is, I think, too good a subplot for them not to be involving it when they actually do it. That bit's probably a little way down the line, not in season 1, but certainly the Lannisters were there and were involved from early on. Question from, I think, did I have another one? I did, from MC Kaplunk. Great name. Tinfoil Theory, Robert. You are Azora High. Your YouTube channel is Lightbringer, and you are leading us through the long night till the winds of winter. Thanks for the great content. Thank you so much. Well, I don't know what to do with that. I'll other than Azora High killing the person he cares about the most and possibly even being a bad guy, yeah, I'll take that. That's fine. My channel being Lightbringer, I shall change the name immediately. In Deep Lightbringer. So thank you for that. Jared. Or not Jared, I just did Jared's one. Diego Godoy saying, Hola, Robert. Why do you think Tywin never tried to overthrow the Mad King? Was it just due to lack of alliances and military power? Well, this is a good question. So the Lannisters, as I say, Tywin, yes, he is decisive when he needs to be decisive, but he plans long term. And he had long-term plans for what he was doing with getting the Lannisters more power. He was going to be Hand of the King, which he became. As Hand of the King, he had huge amounts of influence. He thought he had huge amounts of influence over the king. At a younger age, he probably did. They were close. But as King Aerys II slowly transformed into the Mad King, then that relationship was soured somewhat. And Tywin's cunning plans were manifold. He started out thinking, well, maybe I will get Cersei, my daughter, to marry Prince Rhaegar, because there were no other Targaryen children for him to marry, so he thought maybe he'd try his hand at that, but Aerys said no, not having that. There are hints, I've not done a video on it, but at some point I may, there are hints that perhaps he may have tacitly been involved with Rhaegar's plotting against Aerys. If not involved in it, then I think that Tywin reached a point where he would prefer Rhaegar to be in charge rather than Aerys. And the Defiance of Duskendale, where King Aerys was imprisoned in this place called Duskendale, just up the coast from King's Landing, that is astonishing that Tywin, for 6 months, Tywin Lannister didn't really do anything. He sent representations, he discussed things and all the rest of it, but the king was captured in a castle a few miles away from King's Landing, and Tywin didn't do anything proactive. It took Barristan Selmy, with this act of great heroism, to single-handedly rush in and rescue the king. That's a fantastic story, and he went and rescued the king. This is part of the legend of Barristan Selmy, who was astonishing in his heyday, and he single-handedly raided the castle, got down to the prisons, and brought the king out, seemingly without that being Tywin's plan. It was just Barristan Selmy saying, you know what, I'm in the King's Guard, I have to go and save the king. So his inaction, I think, spoke volumes there. But then he also had another plan. He was going to be marrying Jaime off to Lysa Tully, who later became Lysa Arryn. But that got ruined by Aerys making Jaime a member of the Kingsguard, which meant that he couldn't marry. So that, I think, was the final straw. Basically, Tywin thought he was clever enough to gain the Lannisters the power that he needed through his own clever political means, and then eventually he realized that he couldn't, and that is where we're at. So it's not a matter of why didn't he overthrow the Mad King earlier. I don't think he was thinking about that. I think he was thinking long term. Ricardo Guira saying, are the Lannisters related to Targaryens? No, is the short answer. They tried to get, a few times they tried to get themselves married into the Lannisters. I think there might be, really having to scratch my head here, there might be a Lannister many generations ago who married a random Targaryen. There's always people in the chat who know these things better than I do. I'm not one of those people who's got a huge all-encompassing family tree of Westeros in front of me, but in terms of the line of kings, then no, the Lannisters are not on that line. This is because obviously the Targaryens for most of the time wanted to marry other Targaryens or other Velaryons. They occasionally married out to Arryns or Martells or a few other people, but the short answer is no, which is why it would have been a major coup had Tywin managed to get Cersei married to Rhaegar. Brendan, thank you so much for Super Chat, saying, does the Reigns of Castamere have a secret upbringing, like perhaps Jenny of Oldstones in the books? Who made it, when, and to whom? Yes, so the Reigns of Castamere, this is how Tywin made his reputation back in the day. His father Titus was not a good ruler, and the Reigns, as well as the Tarbecks, who were sort of like the next big houses in the Westlands, were basically just they owed money. They had they captured members of House Lannister. They were basically just completely ignoring what the Lannisters were saying. And eventually, Tywin had enough of this, and he went and he was absolutely 100% ruthless in destroying the entirety of House Rain. The reigns of Castamere. Castamere was where they were. That was their home, and he destroyed all of House Rain. They, incidentally, like the Casterly Rock, Castamere had the mere. There's this big water lake, and their home was a mine. And what Tywin did was he locked up all of their doors, and then he just emptied all of the water, diverted all of the water into the mine, and the entire household died. Horrific way to go. And he then used this as an example for everyone else to say, this is what happens if you defy House Lannister. It's not going to happen on my watch. And the song, The Reigns of Castamere, is used as a way to intimidate people, just to say to them, okay, this is what House Lannister does to people who oppose them. Are you really willing to risk that fate? So you get hints, you get it seen, or you hear it played at various times during the books. It's played as a sort of a House Lannister anthem, really, I think it's at Joffrey's wedding, but you also see it. Jaime talks about playing it outside Riverrun to the people who are inside it, to sort of say, you've got Lannisters are now besieging your castle. Do you really want to cross us? It's played at the Red Wedding, so it's when the Lannisters are doing their thing or wishing to threaten people. They are trying to remind them of what they are capable of. Question from where did I get Reflective Rambling? Hi there, saying for Kodor Hassan. This is something I love, when people take other people's questions from the chat. The chat moves very quickly when I'm reading my own questions or get from my patrons, and I try and pick up as much as I can from the chat, but I can always see super chats because they're highlighted for me, but I don't always get to see everything that everyone else says. So I love it when people use the super chats to ask someone else's question. So thank you, Reflective Rambling. What was Tywin's long-term plan to pay the Iron Bank? The Tyrells wouldn't have just given it to him. Cersei paid by sacking Highgarden. Yes, so on the show, the debt, the Crown's debt, was paid by Cersei sacking Highgarden, getting all of their money, and using that to pay off the debt to the Iron Bank. Now, Tywin didn't necessarily have, I'm sure he was thinking about it, but I don't think he necessarily had one specific cunning plan, because the debt itself had been accrued not under his watch, but under Littlefinger's watch. So yes, they were sort of taking it on, but some of the debt was owed to House Lannister. So you get these kind of debt circles going on. I think probably that he thought that if they could gain enough power through the War of the Five Kings and all the rest of it, winning that was clearly the priority. If they could get enough power and actually become kings, become the de facto rulers, they could then raise the money that they needed, not just from their own area, but from the entirety of the Seven Kingdoms. I think that is where they were looking. I don't think that he had a specific plan beyond that. I think that he probably thought he was a huge believer in his own cleverness, and I think he probably thought that he could then negotiate with them. Once they were in place, he could then negotiate with them. Ultraviolence saying, hi Robert, some families have magical qualities to them, but the Lannisters seem wholly unmagical. Are there any instances of magic with them? Yeah, they do seem largely non-magical. They are this sort of curious blend, it would appear, as we covered, of first men and Andals, without ever really getting either of their magic. And yes, I think there is the Faith of the Seven does it's not really played up, but there is some sort of magic associated with it. I think the fact that there is a weirwood tree in Casterly Rock, but when you go there, it's cramped into this cave. You have to like clamber over roots. It's clearly almost abandoned, but it's still there. I think that is symbolic of the fact that there is still some First Men blood that is there with the Lannisters, but it's not that big or important. Jaime, clearly he has a couple of what we might call prophetic dreams, one of which is a weirwood dream, so there's something going on there. Tyrion certainly seems to have dragon dreams, though there's the possibility that maybe that's for other reasons rather than his Lannister blood. I think the short answer is no, they're not hugely magical. They're in any kind of fantasy world, not every family is going to be hugely magical. Some of them are there because they're powerful because of other means, and I think that the point here is that they are powerful because of other means, not because of their magical powers. AK Channel TV saying, first time, thank you. Would Cersei still be with Jaime? And if this is your first time watching, by the way, welcome. It's fantastic to have you. Would Cersei still be with Jaime if she had been married to Rhaegar? Was there any way to keep her from an affair with Jaime? I think it's almost certainly the case that she would have carried on regardless if she could. The one sort of caveat to that is that she did have this almost childlike, Sansa did really, this almost kind of childlike view of marrying the prince and living happily ever after and having children with the prince. So she clearly thought that she was going to have children with the prince. But the link to Jaime was never going to go away. They were close all the way through. So regardless of whether she thought she was going to marry, I think that this idea that you have to stick to your defined role in society is something that has always rankled with her. So I think that she probably would have carried on if she could. She would have carried on with Jaime even with Rhaegar. Even if she were with Rhaegar. A question from where did I get to? Stephen Dillon saying, why did Tywin marry Sansa to Tyrion if he was just going to give the North to Roose? I think, well, Tywin had a couple of different plans here, and I think that he needed to work out which one was going to work. So yes, he could give the North to Roose, but if he had control over Sansa, that was half the battle. So you have to remember that getting rid of the Starks was his main aim for a large chunk of the War of the Five Kings. Now, the situation, and I was talking to this, actually, I've got coming up, quick advert for something I've got coming up next week, the Learned Hands podcast, who, if you've never come across, you really should. Some real-life lawyers who have a podcast looking at legal issues in Westeros. Fantastically interesting stuff. One of the things that we were talking about there was Robb's will, which he wrote at a time when he was just really concerned about what on earth might the future of House Stark be? Because yes, at the time he was alive, but he thought that Rickon and Bran were dead. He thought that Arya had disappeared and had been gone for over a year and nobody knew where she was, probably dead. And Sansa was married to Tyrion, therefore she was technically no longer a Stark, she was a Lannister. So he, in his mind, at that point, was the only Stark left. And the moment that you think that, actually, that is quite important, to take Sansa out of the reckoning, so there are suddenly no Starks left. All you have to do is kill off Robb Stark, and then there are no Starks for the rest of the North to be rallying behind, and you can put the Boltons in place. So this was a much wider plan, if you like. Yes, he could have ended up with Tyrion and Sansa up there. That was definitely part of his plan, but as a side effect of that, taking Sansa out of the equation, thereby removing the chance of there being any Stark that the North could rally around, meant that he could give it to the Boltons. Obviously, what then happened was that rumors of Rickon started to arrive, and so the House Manderley started trying to find him and all the rest of it. So this is where we get the Great Northern Conspiracy. But that's why he had these. They seem like two different plans, but they're actually one plan, all happening at once. John Martin, thank you for the super chat. Just saying thank you for the great content. You're very welcome. Always a bright spot in my day. That makes me very happy. Thank you. Zachary Fike saying howdy from Texas. I can never say things like howdy. It doesn't come across very well in my accent, but hi. First time making it live. Welcome. I adore your content. What do you think about the theory that Tyrion is the Mad King's son? We were going to get onto this at some point, weren't we? I think I've got a question about this later, but I will do this now. And then if this is your question on Patreon, then I shall sort of wrap it up in here. I've said it before. I'm sure I will say it again. Is Tyrion a Targaryen is the theory that I vacillate on the most. I change my mind almost every time I dig into it and have a think about it. On the one hand, he is actually the Lannister who is most like Tywin. Jenna, his aunt, mentions it. We can see it in the text, the way that he thinks, the way that he acts. He is very much like his father. So he does seem to be his father's son. And there is this irony there that of the children that Tywin has, the one that he wishes he didn't have is the one who is most like him. But on the other hand, we get huge amounts of hints that there's something not right. Yes, I'm not going to go into all the details of how it might be possible. Suffice to say that Aerys was king. He clearly found Joanna attractive, and he clearly tried to have his way with her on several occasions. We just do not know whether that happened, and if it did happen, whether that resulted in any children. But Tyrion, you get the rumors that he was born mutated in the way that lots of Targaryens are. He obviously he's got some physical deformations anyway. His eye colors are different. He's not just short, but he's sort of squat. He's like almost grotesque is the way that he's described in the books. And he gets dragon dreams, and that is something that Targaryens get. He seems to have this. He dreams of flying dragons. Obviously, you got on the show, you had this moment when he goes in and sort of meets the dragons, and they sort of seem to smell him and then don't breathe fire on him, which is slightly suggestive. And there's a whole host of other things going on there that may suggest maybe he is. So I kind of change my mind on this a lot, and I've decided to go easy on myself. Most of the time I do try and come down on one side or another. I am never going to learn this is my answer. George R. R. Martin is not going to tell us. He likes the fact that it's a little bit mysterious, and it's possible, and it's a thing which would change the way of viewing it. But frankly, who is going to tell us if it is the case? Aerys is dead. Joanna's dead. Tywin is dead. The closest he came was saying, "You're no son of mine." Did he mean it literally? If he did, then that would be quite a big hint. But nobody's actually ever said categorically, or could say categorically, that he is a Targaryen. So, or a half Targaryen. So we don't know. George R. Martin's never going to tell us. I am frustratingly going to sit on the fence on this one, and I know that it's probably not the answer everybody wants. I promise I will do another video on it at some point and come down one side or the other. But for the time being, I'm not going to. I'm just going to say either is possible, and we're never actually going to learn. Justin Thompson, thank you for the super chat, saying first live stream. Welcome to you as well. Your videos help me relax when I can't sleep. Thanks for doing what you do. Thank you so much. I love it. People say this, that my videos help them sleep, which I've decided to take as a compliment. So thank you. I love hearing how people listen to my content, and thank you so much. I think that's me caught up on the chat. Let's go back to some questions from my patrons. Henning J says, "Hi Robert, do you think Tywin was poisoned before Tyrion killed him? If yes, by whom? And do you think some secret descendants of the Rains or Tarbecks are still around who could be involved in this?" So on the second bit, no, I don't think that there are Rains or Tarbecks who did this. I did a video, if you can find it, I'm going to say a few months ago, that put forward what I think is the case, which is that Oberyn Martell was the person who poisoned Tywin Lannister. The reason why it seems that he was poisoned, well, there's a few reasons. We hear about this, and I've forgotten off the top of my head the exact which poison it was, but we hear about what it does. And what it does is that it blocks up your system. So there's a buildup of toxins within your system. So you go to the toilet, but you can't do anything while you're there. And then all these toxins inside you eventually kill you. Now, there are a couple of bits of evidence here. The first is that Tywin's body, when it's laid out afterwards, it had been prepared by the people in the Septon Scepters, the experts in preparing dead bodies. It had been prepared by them for being laid out overnight. But the smell of the body is overpowering. There we get descriptions of like pus coming out from it. It's really quite grim, but the smell is overwhelming. You get people passing out, you get people stopping and just like gagging just by being close to the body. This is not a normal dead body. There's something going wrong with the dead body. Very clearly there's something which seems to be poison, which seems to be that poison, added to which he is on the toilet when he's killed, and the clear implication is that he had been there for a while, because Tyrion arrives, strangles Shay, wanders around for a little bit, and then heads in and finds his father. So Tywin's apparently been there all that time and yet still not done anything, because when Tywin, apologies if you're eating while I'm explaining these rather gruesome details, when Tywin shoots him and when he dies, then we get this rather graphic description of his bowels opening and the smell coming forth being horrendous. So it seems as if he had been poisoned. The question is, who might have done it? Now, yes, we could sort of say there's lots of people out there who potentially might want to do it, but Oberyn Martell, I think we've got, if in all good murder mysteries, you have to look for means, motive, and opportunity. Oberyn Martell wanted to kill Tywin. We know that he wanted to kill Tywin. He was absolutely focused and obsessed on killing Tywin, as well as the Mountain. And Amory Lorch. Those were the three people he wanted to kill. Amory Lorch was already dead by the time he made it to King's Landing. Obviously, he had the fight against the Mountain. He was trying to kill him there, but he also wanted to kill Tywin, and he couldn't kill Tywin in open combat, so the best way for him to do it would be poisoning him. So he has the motive to do it. Did he have the means? Well, we know that he was a master poisoner. He's known as, he's called the Red Viper because of his how much he knows about poisons. He went to Old Town, studied poisons. He is a poisons master. He has the means to do it. Did he have the opportunity? Yeah. We read of at least once when he shares a meal with Tywin. So the opportunity was there. It is the most likely solution. He was just sort of hanging, otherwise he's just sort of hanging around with people that he wants dead, not doing anything, and that does not sound like Oberyn Martell. I think it's almost certain that he was the person who was poisoning him. And just following up, while we're talking about Oberyn Martell, Lady Pushkin says, hello, Robert. Why do you think that Oberyn Martell took so long to exact revenge? Do you think it was just a chance event, or would he have done something else? So this is the background to what I've just been talking about. Oberyn Martell was very close to his sister, Elia. And Elia, obviously Rhaegar's wife, was brutally murdered by House Lannister, effectively, and so he held those three people, Amory Lorch, the Mountain, and Tywin Lannister. He held those three people responsible, and his initial reaction to hearing about what happened was to try and raise an army in Dorne and attack the Lannisters to keep the civil war going. He went round for a long time absolutely hot-headedly trying to get revenge at that precise moment in time. He wanted revenge then and there. That was what very much in his character. He wasn't like a slow plotting kind of person like his brother Doran. He was wanting revenge then. So what happened? Well, he was clearly persuaded that wasn't going to work. Doran was in charge of Dorne, and he was in charge of the forces. The Lannisters were now safely ensconced in King's Landing. An attack would not work. The rest of the realm were rallying around them, whether they liked them or not, and a full frontal attack wouldn't work then. Doran seems to have persuaded Oberyn to rally behind his plan, and Doran's plan was to restore the Targaryens to power. It's a long-term gain. He saw Viserys and Daenerys had escaped over to Essos. They were in Braavos for a while, and he thought, we will support them and we will remarry into the Targaryens, and then we will get them back in, kick out the Lannisters, we will kill anyone we want, and that's going to be the grand plan, marrying the Martells into the Targaryen family. And Oberyn seems to have bought into this idea, been persuaded that this is the better way to get the revenge. He will get revenge. Doran had to promise that he would get the revenge, but he just offered a different way of doing it. Oberyn was the person who was there, who brokered for the Martells the secret marriage agreement between the Martells and between Arianne Martell and Viserys Targaryen, while they were both still very young. So he seemed to have been on board with this. What happens at the beginning of A Song of Ice and Fire, Book 1, Viserys dies. Suddenly, Doran's master plan is just falling apart. And at this point, Oberyn seems to think, you know what? That plan's not worked. I'm now claiming my right to get revenge, and Doran accepts it. So I think that was what the delay was between Elia being killed and Oberyn trying to exact his revenge, was that this was Doran held him back while his plan was working, and then when his plan seemed not to be working, because what happened was that Viserys was killed. Daenerys had been, in the view of pretty much everyone in Westeros, she'd been married off to one of the Dothraki and would probably never be seen again. Rumors of dragons didn't start coming for a little bit. So the Targaryens were now gone. That whole idea was not going to work. So Doran released Oberyn to do what he wanted. Mr. E. Knight, thank you so much, saying, just want to say your hard work on your video for what to expect in terms of the size of the Winds of Winter was incredible. Thank you for giving that to the community. Thank you so much. It's I really enjoyed doing it. It took a long time and it took a lot of effort. And if you've not watched it, this is my attempt to work out how big the Winds of Winter will be. Not by just saying, okay, so it has to fit into this size book or anything like that. I know others have tried that approach, but I don't think George R. R. Martin is doing that. I think he's writing the story he wants to write, and then he will figure out how do we release this. So I tried to work through the plot lines that we know about. We've got 11 sample chapters have been released in various forms. He's told us at various times when he's writing different POV characters. He's given us hints about plot lines that are going to be happening. We know some things that have to happen, that have to follow on from what's there. It gets a little fuzzier the further into the book you go, but we do have a lot to build on. So I tried to work my way through that. It turned into quite a long video. I think it's like a 40-ish minute video. If you're at all interested in that, please do check it out. The idea is not to be a definitive answer, but to start a debate, to people just think, okay, that sounds like a good starting point. I'm sure I'm going to be right about some things and wrong about some other things, but if this sparks a debate, then I'll be very happy. Question from who did we have? The Lady Eternal. Thank you so much. Picking up a question for Dark Horse. Thank you. Again, I love it when people do this. That's very kind of you. Did the Lannisters lose Brightraw before or after the Dance of the Dragons? The Targaryen War, not the book. If before, when and how? Love catching your streams live. Yes, so I'd have to get my timelines right on this, but this was Tommen II, I think, was before. That's a techie question. It's the kind of thing that I'm sure there's going to be somebody in the chat who will know off the top of their head when Tommen. So Tommen II. So this would have been king. So this would have been beforehand. So yes, this I'm working it out as I talk. So as King Tommen II, that will have been probably during the 100 years between the Doom and the Targaryen invasion. So before the Dance of the Dragons. I talked about how it happened a little bit earlier in the live stream, but basically Tommen went to where Valyria used to be and tried to see whether he could get any of the riches that were there, but he failed, and he disappeared, and so did his sword Brightraw. So that's what was going on there. Kevin Warner, thank you so much, saying, a little late, but do you think Tyrion could be the Valonqar? I think it's Jaime or Arya, but how could Tyrion choke the life from Cersei like it says in the prophecy? I don't think it's Tyrion, but Cersei thinks it's Tyrion. And the important point, and I feel I rattle this off quite a lot of the times, but I don't think it can be emphasized enough. George R. R. Martin cares more about how people react to prophecy than the actual truth of the prophecy itself. He's a character and plot-driven writer. That's that's how he operates. So it actually matters more the fact that Cersei thinks that this is Tyrion, which drives the action, rather than it matters more than actually who it is supposed to be, really. The word, for those who don't know the word Valonqar, this was part of the Maggie the Frog prophecy that Cersei got when she was much younger. And at the end, the Valonqar will wrap his hands around your cool white neck, I think it said, and choke the life from you. And I think that is basically, and she thinks the Valonqar is the High Valyrian word for little brother. And so she interprets that as being, oh, who's my little brother and is little? Tyrion. Therefore, Tyrion is going to kill me. That's what she believes, and that is the thing that is driving the plot. Now, if we dig into this, then we get 101 different interpretations. It's a Valonqar, the Valonqar, rather than your Valonqar, so it's not necessarily your little brother. It could be anybody's little brother. Also, we've had these hints that in High Valyrian, well, it's not just hints, it's confirmation that in High Valyrian, at least some words are gender neutral, and so this could mean little sibling or little sister. So it's not necessarily Tyrion at all. But also the other thing that is the sort of the clear oversight in Cersei's mind is that Jaime is also her little brother. Jaime was born just after her, so that's entirely possible. Could it be Tyrion? Maybe. I think that he will probably in some way lead to her downfall, but I don't think that he's going to be physically killing her at the end of it. I think that might be me caught up now. Yep, so I think I'm caught up on the chat. Sylvester Snow from Patreon, you just joined my Patreon, actually, I saw, so welcome. Do you foresee Joanna appearing in Cersei's dreams like she did with Jaime's, or is this something for once Jaime doesn't share along with Cersei? Yeah, so Jaime had a dream. We always think about Jaime's weirwood vision, but Jaime had a second dream. And this is in his last chapter, I think it is, that we have from him. He has this dream of when he's standing in front of his father's body laid out in state, this woman coming towards him and talking to this woman who is clearly his mother. And the conversation is very much about, Tywin always imagined that his children would be this beautiful princess or queen and this noble and brave knight. And Jaime says, but Cersei is a queen and I am a knight. And then she just laughs, a kind of a bitter laugh. And it's kind of like hinting that, yeah, they might technically be the things that Tywin always wanted, but they're not. Actually, he's not a brave knight. He is a knight, but he's not shown that he's this brave, wonderful, shining knight that perhaps exemplifies being a true knight. Cersei may well be a queen, but she's not this radiant, wonderful queen who perhaps Tywin imagined. The context for and I did a video on this one relatively recently. The context for this dream, though, is very much Jaime reassessing who he is and what his role is with the Lannister family and breaking free from it. It starts snowing outside when he wakes up from this dream, and he immediately starts thinking about his family and how that part of his life is now over. He thinks, what would Tywin, my father, do in the snow to sort of make sure that the kingdom keeps going? And then he goes, he's dead now, so that doesn't matter what he would have done. He thinks about that if Cersei were there, that he would, stuff some snow down the back of her dress, or maybe he would throw a snowball at Tyrion. But those days are also gone now, because how can you do these things when you've got just one hand? And then he gets a letter from Cersei begging him to come and help her, and he crumples that up and orders it burnt. So the context for this dream is actually more important than the specifics. The context is Jaime is turning his back on his family. And that's the point at which Brienne reappears in his life and says, "Come, follow me," and he does. So that is what is going on there. Because of that, this is not a dream which will appear to both twins, because it's not a weirwood dream so much as just a what is going on in Jaime's mind kind of dream. And Cersei won't be getting that. Okay, we've got Julia Erickson saying, why do you think Tywin married his first cousin? Even though he probably wanted to marry her, it does not seem to be very politically advantageous. I also feel like this is very out of character for Tywin to follow his heart. He always seemed to do what he thought he had to be done, and not what he actually wanted, even from a very young age. So I sort of covered this a little bit earlier when somebody was asking about why he didn't remarry. But I think this is the soft heart of Tywin Lannister, that afterwards he just kind of built barriers around. He did love her. He cared about her. That's why he married her and wanted to be with her. He saw her as a good mother for his children. He didn't want someone else coming in and being their mother after that. This was what he wanted. He saw it as both good for him, something that he wanted, and also I suspect he thought that she was good for the family, for the children and all the rest of it. So I think it was pragmatic as well as being for love. But yeah, it was the thing I would probably want to emphasize right now is that this is the element of Tywin that we don't see, but was there, and it was only ever glimpsed through his relationship with his wife. Diego Godoy saying, if Jaime hadn't released Tyrion after his trial, do you think Tywin would have really executed him or just sent him to the wall? This is a really interesting question. We don't have a full answer on this one. My guess is that he would have sent him to the wall, because what would he have gained by having him killed? I don't think he thought that Tyrion had done it. I think that he wanted to punish him and get him out of King's Landing, and I think that sending him to the wall would probably be as good as he was going to get. I don't think he felt the need to kill his own son, or even if he didn't think that he was his son, he thought that he was the son of his beloved wife. So I don't think he would have gone through with actually having him killed. I think that he would have sent him to the wall. But we don't know, because we never got to find out. Maester Manster saying, as far as I can tell, the Lannisters' power is totally dependent on a single resource which is running out. I find it interesting that Tywin was so focused on his family's legacy, yet his actions have quite possibly ruined it. He used his wealth for military purposes and initially loaning money. However, he used his military to overthrow his primary debtor, thereby taking on his own debt. Any thoughts on this? Yeah, we covered this a little bit earlier on, but I think this is a really interesting critique of what happened, and I think it's one of those times where Tywin trusted his own ability to get himself out of it. So initially, yes, he did. He overthrew the Mad King, but I think that was and got Robert Baratheon into power and got his daughter married to the king, so that the Lannisters were firmly if not in control, then they were not going to be troubled by the king for a long time. I think that was pure pragmatism. He held back in Robert's Rebellion. He held back until the very last moment, as if waiting to see who was going to win. And then once he knew who was going to win, he then charged in on their side and made sure that they owed him. So that was what he was doing. And I think that he knew that he had to just be on the right side there. It's pure pragmatism. Then what do you do once you're there and the king is starting to rack up debts? Do you allow them to just keep on being in debt to foreign powers? Or do you say, okay, well, we'll lend you some money? I think that was the way he saw it, was that they would lend some money, and so then the crown would be in debt to them. So the dynamic could carry on, that yes, the Baratheons might technically be in power, but really it's the Lannisters in control, because they would be in control of not just like having someone on the Kingsguard being the queen, but also they were the people who ultimately could start to withhold credit, and that would then allow them power over the throne. So I think that was Tywin's cunning plan. But he obviously wasn't to know everything that was going to happen with the War of the Five Kings, with Robert Baratheon's death, and all the rest of it. He couldn't foresee all of the possibilities because Littlefinger deliberately created chaos. That was his whole plan. He just wanted to create chaos, set the world against each other, and then see how he could navigate it. That was what was going on there. So it wasn't that Tywin had a cunning plan, but it was a little bit stupid, really. He did have a cunning plan that was actually at the time quite working, but then Littlefinger threw the whole thing up in the air, and from that moment on, it wasn't looking as rosy as before. Question from Stephen Dillon about the savage giant that Sansa will slay. He says, everyone assumes that the savage giant that Sansa will slay is going to be Littlefinger, but the person who has the most giant-related imagery in their story is Tyrion. Do you think that Tyrion may be the giant Sansa slays in the Castle of Snow, especially since they do have a connection? Okay, so for those who don't know what this question is about, there is a vision that the Ghost of High Heart has. She has a whole series of visions that she just sort of rattles off, and they are all absolutely, she nails them. So we can trust this. And she has one vision about Sansa at the Purple Wedding with a hairnet, and it's sort of effectively it's fangs of venom coming from it, which is basically saying the poison that is going to be killing Joffrey is in Sansa's hairnet, which it was. And then she says, I see the same woman or girl again, and she is slaying a giant in a castle of snow. So what does this mean? Well, there is a plain text reading of it, which everybody agrees on, that I'll explain in just 1 second. The thing that there are various interpretations on is whether or not we should be looking for something more than that, whether that's just a symbolic thing and there's something else going on there. So the plain text reading of it is that this is just purely a vision of Sansa in the Eyrie. Because we read about this, what happens is she gets there and she's playing in the snow, effectively, and she finds herself, she's making a snow castle, and she finds that she's making it Winterfell. And again, just taking it as is with the characters and all the rest of it, this is actually quite touching, because this is the first moment that Sansa is starting to realize actually she wants to be all the way back home. she's starting out with her journey. She was wanting to be away from Winterfell. She hated it. She wanted to be down south. Then, after she went through absolutely everything and she did get out from King's Landing, she could still go anywhere and do what she wants, but subconsciously now she realizes well, she can't do whatever she wants. She's at Littlefinger's mercy, obviously, which is not a good place to be. But her subconscious now is picking up on the fact that she wants to be back in Winterfell. And so she builds this castle out of snow, which is Winterfell. She's making Winterfell out of snow. And then Robin Arryn comes in, and he's got this doll, and he just sort of like rah, 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 plays around with it and is destroying the castle. And this gets Sansa, because she hadn't realized how important this was to her. And then she takes this doll and rips it. And that is her. The doll, in comparison to the castle, is a giant, and she is slaying this. So that is the plain text reading. There's nobody disputes the fact that that is clearly at least part of what is going on here. The question is whether or not there is a figurative element to this. Is Sansa going to be figuratively slaying a giant in a castle of snow? Now, the castle of snow presumably is Winterfell, and this implies that some actual or figurative giant she is going to kill at Winterfell. Now, the question you said, is it going to be Littlefinger, or might it be Tyrion? I don't think it's going to be Tyrion, because increasingly, again, she's doing a lot of thinking while she's in the Eyrie. Increasingly, she's starting to realize, you know what? He was actually all right, wasn't he? He was, when you think about it, yes, she didn't particularly like him, but he defended her. He deliberately made a point of not sleeping with her until she wanted him to, which sounds like quite a low baseline, but Tyrion was under, it is quite a low baseline to be clear, but Tyrion was under a lot of pressure from his father, from other people, that he should consummate the marriage, because otherwise it could be annulled quite easily. So Tyrion was actually resisting pressure from his father in doing that, in protecting Sansa. So I don't think so, and I think she's realized that actually he was not that bad. I think if there is a figurative level on this, then this is a hint that she will slay Littlefinger in Winterfell, that she will, this giant of a man who has been behind everything that's been going on all the way through this story. Let's not forget, right from the very beginning, he was the one who started the War of the Five Kings. He's been the one setting people against each other all the time. He is a major figure in this, and if she can bring about his death, then that would be a figurative killing a giant in the Castle of Snow. Question from Googly Woogly saying, I'm so late. If you haven't covered it yet, is Tyrion really a Lannister? The white hair always seemed odd to me. If you've already discussed, just say so and I'll catch up in the rewind. I have already discussed it, so do catch up. Thank you for the super chat. But yeah, another one of these kind of hints is the fact that his hair is not described as Lannister gold hair, but it's almost a bit silvery, which is obviously quite Targaryen-y. So yeah, that's another hint that way. LMC, thank you, saying loving this session. Thanks for keeping at it. I think we should have a Winds of Winter release poll. Yes, when will it be released? Or how big will it be? I think both would be interesting, but I've given up on guessing when it's going to be released. I'm just sticking by the amount of times I've sort of guessed and been wrong. I'm now just accepting the fact that he is writing, There's no doubt about that. And all the time he's writing, he is making a bigger book, and that is about as far as I can go with it. He's still got a long way to go. He says he has, and I don't think we should disagree with him. The Lady Eternal, thank you. Respectfully, I think Tywin would have sent Tyrion to the wall because men die of cold or wildling attack, and his hands and conscience would be clean. Sentencing Tyrion to death would have made Tywin a kinslayer in small folks' arms. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Thank you for that. I think if Tywin had really wanted to kill Tyrion himself, he could have done it at any point. He recognized Tyrion's strengths grudgingly, but he never did kill him. He wanted to. He said, he wanted to just dash his head against the rocks, but he couldn't prove he wasn't his. And so the moment that, because he built up this huge reputation of always protecting the Lannisters, if he was somebody who killed the Lannisters himself, then that just undermines absolutely everything. So yeah, I think that's entirely right. I think that if Tyrion went to the wall and died at the wall, then he would probably feel that his conscience was clear. It's a complicated relationship, but that's a really good point. So thank you for that. Did I have one more? I think that's me caught up on the chat now. So let's go back to some questions from my patrons. Jenny Bird saying, do you believe that, as we've just been on this, do you believe any of the theories that Tyrion or Jaime and Cersei are actually Targaryens? I personally suspect all three are actually Tywin's children. Would love to hear your thoughts. I've covered Tyrion, so let's just quickly look at Jaime and Cersei. Neither of them are much like Tywin, let's be honest. And Cersei in particular has been starting to get heiress vibes about her. And I was looking at this when I was looking at the question of whether Cersei's going to be blowing up the sept in the books. There's this bit when she burns down the Tower of the Hand, and she uses wildfire, and she thinks it's beautiful. She stays behind to look at it while the party all move inside, and the Jaime, who's there, comes up to her and actually says, you're being quite like the Mad King right now. You do realize that. And Jaime obviously has a history with the Mad King and wildfire plots and all the rest of it. So he sees something in her that is very much like that. Now, because neither of them are particularly like Tywin, that does make you start to wonder. There's also the fact that Jaime and Cersei are not Lannister-y names. They're not Lannister names, but Tywin and Tytos and Tyrek and these things, these are traditional Lannister-y names. Jaime and Cersei, less so. So what's going on there? Why were they not named in typical, particularly for Jaime, who was the heir? Why would he not be named in a sort of a typical Lannister way? But I think the biggest evidence, so that all of those things are sort of there, and as I say, there's clearly the same argument could be made for on the basis of Aerys clearly lusting after Joanna Lannister as it is for when you get the is Tyrion a Targaryen argument. But against that, Tywin never seems to even hint or suggest it. He never seems to think it. That doesn't seem to be what's going on there. It's there all the time with Tyrion, under the surface at the very least. And yes, some of it is the fact that he blamed him for murdering Joanna just by being born, that he was born a dwarf, bringing shame upon the family. Yes, there's all those things, but at the same time, there seems to be an extra layer, this I couldn't prove you weren't mine kind of layer that he thinks that he might do. That we don't get a hint of that at all with Jaime and Cersei. That's not what's going on now. So possibly, but my general take is that of the three, the one that is most likely, because of the physical stuff, because of the dragon dreams and things like that, that is most likely is Tyrion. Question from Dre Beverly. So was that Joanna in the Sept since Jaime had one hand? Yes. So this was so the dream that Jaime had of the woman was clearly Joanna. Now, the Jaime having one hand thing is because he says, in this is a dream, and she says, how do you know? And he says, but then it's in my dreams I always have two hands, but this one he just had the one. The implication, this is real in some way. This is not just about him as he wishes that he were. This is about him getting real. This is about him understanding who he truly is. The fact that it's Joanna is, I think, very clear all the way through this. She knows Tywin's mind. She talks to Jaime, addressing him as a child. When she walks away, it says that her dresses are whispering lullabies. All of the imagery there is of his mother. This is her. He thinks first it might be Cersei because looks like Cersei, but then he sees it's not. He recognizes her, but at the same time he doesn't, which is perhaps what you would do if you had a mother who you'd known in your younger years, but then hadn't seen all this time. So yes, this is definitely Joanna Lannister in that dream. And the hand thing is just to show that this, I think, is just to show that this is her. This is Jaime getting real. Okay, question from Umberto Pena. Hi, Robert. Do you think House Lannister have historically had problems making alliances with other great houses? One would think that being the wealthiest house in Westeros, everyone would try and grab a piece of the cake, but in practice, no one has made a long-standing alliance with them. It's an interesting point, and I think a few people have come out with this observation. Yes, I think that's right that they haven't, but then there aren't many of the great houses that have. The House Stark, for example, clearly they kept good relations with the other houses in the north, but they didn't have a long-term alliance with any houses south of the Neck. The Martells, similarly, they didn't. They made an alliance with House Targaryen, but before that they didn't have a history of it. That's not what they were about. So it's not that the Lannisters are particularly different to other houses here, but it is noticeable that they don't have a sort of any natural allies in and of themselves. It's probably more that they're sort of on the fringes of the Riverlands and that whole area that was not so clearly defined. The north was clearly defined, the Vale of Arryn was clearly defined, Dawn was clearly defined by these mountain ranges. The middle bit of Westeros had a lot more fluid borders for a very long time, and kingdoms grew and shrank and took over one another and kicked each other out and all the rest of it. So that was probably at least part of the reason why there weren't any long-standing alliances. It was everybody always having to look out for themselves. Ali Al-Humana saying, hi, Robert, are we sure that the saying, a Lannister pays his debts is true? Examples to the contrary. Cersei claims in Feast that Lannisters pay their debts in their own time. Tywin and Tyrion promising the cursed castle of Harrenhal to people, even though it's not under the Lannisters' control. Tywin refusing to hand over a living and healthy Grey Clegane to Dawn over the death of Elia and her children. This is an idea found on a WordPress page called Race for the Throne by Stephen Atwell. Well, I have read the article, so I can't really comment on the article itself. In terms of the Lannister always paying their debts, this is a sort of a catchphrase that the Lannisters have taken on. The house words are "hear me roar," but it's just like they thought that's a little bit vague. They want something which is more specific. A Lannister always pays their debts. Now, I think the examples aren't necessarily the best examples there. So Tywin refusing to hand over a living and healthy Gregor Clegane to Dawn, I don't think he thought he had a debt there. I don't think he thought that he owed them anything. That was just him doing what he had to do in the Game of Thrones, and he didn't owe Gregor Clegane to anyone. So I don't think he felt that he had a debt that he had to repay. Cersei saying Lannisters pay their debts in their own time. Yet this is Cersei, and I don't think that this is. I don't think she truly understands the value and strength of that phrase, which was a chosen phrase to show that they are a strong house who will stand by their word. Tywin built on that, and with the Reigns of Castamere, is to say, you do not cross us. We will do what we say. And that is the whole point that he is trying to say, is that we're going to be upfront, and if we say we're going to do something, we will do it. So whether that's good or bad, beware. Cersei didn't understand that. There's so much. Cersei, she viewed herself as being her father's daughter, but she was not strategic. She's always tactical. She's thinking about things in the moment rather than thinking about the long-term impact of stuff. And saying, we will pay stuff back in our own time, is sort of grabbing at or fuzzying the lines of this, saying rather than saying we will pay it back, is say, well, when we want to. It kind of undermines the point that's being made there. So, do the Lannisters always pay their debts? No. But that's when they do, they are undermining the strength of the phrase that is there, is what I would say. But they clearly have kept it enough for it to be a phrase that people know and understand. So when Tyrion says a Lannister always pays his debts, people don't turn around and say, no, they don't. Don't be stupid. We know that because of X, Y, and Z. People go, yep, that's true. You do. So it is clearly the history is there. If you dig in there, we don't need to know all the instances where the Lannisters have paid their debts, but we do know that the general feeling amongst people is that, yes, this is true. The Lannisters do always pay their debts. Mara Lee, question: when Tywin Lannister was killed, who took over as Lord of Casterly Rock and the title Warden of the East, Warden of the West? I assume so. When Tywin was killed, Cersei took over as Lady Casterly Rock. Now, whether she should have done or not is a different matter, but it couldn't have gone to Tyrion because Tyrion had just killed his father. You can't give it to him. Couldn't go to Jaime because Jaime's a member of the Kingsguard. He can't inherit anything. So she's next. So that's why she inherits it. You could make a case that maybe it could go to her son, but her son is the king, so he can't do it. So yes, she has it. The presumption is that after her, then maybe it would go to Marcella. But that's the technicality. Question from Mod Mary from Samuel Walt. Thank you for picking up on Samuel's question. Why were the Lannisters snubbed by the Targs even before Aerys II? I don't know when you're saying why were they snubbed by them. I think in terms of why weren't they given the due place that they should have at the top table? Well, before Aerys II, there was Titus Lannister, who wasn't really, wasn't snubbed. He just wasn't very good at his job, and so the Lannisters weren't very powerful. So yeah, why on earth would they, would the Targaryens give them anything? Before that, the Lannisters were involved. They were part of what was going on in court life. There were often Lannisters on the small council, not as many as there were for other noble houses, perhaps, but they were involved. So I don't think that there were lots of specific snubs there. It really depended on who the Lannisters were at specific moments in time. That's, I think, caught up on the questions in the chat. Just very quickly, for those who were wondering what's going on with the channel, I'm coming out with 1 or 2 J.R.R. Tolkien videos per week as of next week, looking at some of the questions behind the Lord of the Rings. I've got one that I've just finished writing, which I'm really excited about, actually, which is, if you think about the end of the Lord of the Rings, the end bit when Gollum grabs, you can't really say spoilers now for Lord of the Rings, can you? It's been out there for so long. But anyway, when Gollum takes the ring, having bitten it off Frodo's finger, and then just kind of slips and falls, that has always felt quite anticlimactic to me. After all of the struggles, all of the efforts that have gone on, what's the message we get from this? Frodo failed. And the only reason that the ring got destroyed was because Gollum slipped, lost his footing. I think there's another reason. I think that if you dig into it, and I've got this video coming out probably in about a week's time, there is a reason why he fell. There is a curse. And I will say no more than that, but I think that there is a very good reason that when you just dig under it, actually, it wasn't just an accident at the end there. It was actually something going on. But that's Lord of the Rings stuff. If you're interested, I've got playlists for Lord of the Rings things, which you can find on the channel. I've got videos coming up on Game of Thrones stuff too. Can't think off the top of my head what it is. Oh, one on the Hound I've just been writing through. If you like the Hound, check that one out. And as I said, I've got a conversation with the Learned Hands podcast, which is coming online next Wednesday. There we're discussing legal issues like Rob's will. Is it sustainable making Jon his heir? Can he do that? What about divorce law? Can Sansa and Tyrion get their marriage annulled? What about Targaryen succession law? What's going on there? Who's actually, and it's not as easy as or straightforward as you might think, who's actually the next in the Targaryen line of succession? So there's we've covered some fascinating ground if you're interested in that. But also patrons, thank you so much. If you're interested in either supporting this channel or getting access to some of the stuff I do just for my patrons, patrons get various benefits at different levels. All patrons get priority questions for my live streams, as I've been framing the live stream today around patrons' questions. But at $5, say, you get access to all of the audio I produce here. At $10, you get extra benefits. You get a thank you down in the description, and also a chance to vote every now and then on what I'm going to be covering in the future. So if that is at all enticing, or if you just want to support the channel, there is a link down in the description to my Patreon page. Okay, let's get back on with the questions from my patrons. Persephone says, "Hi Robert, I was just wondering if Cersei would have been a better person if her mother hadn't passed away while giving birth to Tyrion. If Tywin had remarried, do you think it would have made a difference in Cersei's personality, or was she just born to be evil? Thank you again for all that you do. It keeps me busy and my mind off all of the fires that are raging all around me here in the northwest. Smoke is so bad we can't even go outside for a walk." Yeah, I've been reading this about what's going on there on the west coast of America. It sounds horrific. So stay safe, guys. I know you will do. I hope you manage to keep yourself and your loved ones well away and well safe. In terms of the questions with Joanna and Cersei and Jaime, yes, I think that if she had lived, it would have made a huge difference. We're almost told as much, and what happened was that she found them together, Jaime and Cersei, or a maid found them together, and she actively separated them. She put them in different parts of Castle Rock, and she said that she wasn't going to say anything to Tywin unless she found the same thing happening again. So she seemed to have been a more caring, perhaps wiser parent. When she was around, then Tywin also seems to have been slightly more human. So undoubtedly it would have created a different atmosphere for her as she was growing up. And also a role model to look up to. Cersei doesn't look up to many people. She certainly looked up to her father, but having a mother there as well would have been someone else for her to look up to. And after Joanna had gone, Tywin got more Tywin-y, and she didn't have the influence of Joanna. So yeah, I think that was a huge part of making her who she was. And I talked a moment ago about the tragedy within Tywin of losing the woman that he loved. Also, the tragedy for the children, the three of them, the three Lannister children, is that they grew up without a mother, which was horrendous for them, particularly given the way that their father was. They were not exposed to a more caring parent, as it were. So yes, I think undoubtedly it played a huge role. Question from Fodder for Foreshadowing. Good name. Hi, why do you think that Tywin used the phrase for the Red Wedding? I think it was desperation from all of the losses. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Well, so I think he wanted to get Robb out of the way. I think he wanted to get any heirs out of the way. And I think that was the best way for him to do it. I don't think it was desperation. I think it was cynical and clinical planning. I think that he thought he was not winning the war against Robb Stark. Robb Stark was he might have been strategically winning bits of the war, but every battle, Robb Stark won every battle. So the chances of him just actually killing him in battle seemed quite small. So he had to come up with another way. The two Stark boys, Bran and Rickon, were apparently dead. Arya was missing. No one knew where. He'd got control of Sansa. So the only other one that he needed to deal with was Robb. And the opportunity came along to do it. And so he did. I think it was as simple as that. He just thought, I'm just going to get rid of all of the Starks and can do it in whatever way I can. I don't think it was desperation. Question from Sylvester Snow saying, hi Robert, do you think the cut Tyrion chapter from A Dance with Dragons concerned him reuniting with his uncle Geryon in the Sorrows, who is revealed to be the Shrouded Lord? If not, what do you think the Lost Tyrion chapter is about, and why do you think it was cut? Okay. This is detail from A Dance with Dragons. So this is taking us back in time to when George R.R. Martin was writing the last book, and we were all complaining about that not arriving yet. He struggled with parts of A Dance with Dragons, and one of the bits that he struggled with were actually the Tyrion chapters. Normally he seems to sort of rattle out Tyrion chapters because he inhabits his voice very well, but apparently during this voyage that Tyrion had on the Shire Maid with young Griff, old Griff, and all the rest of it, then he struggled a bit and had to rewrite chapters. And he had a chapter that he admitted that he'd written that he got rid of. He just decided not to do that. He started writing it, finished it, and then thought better of it. When he was asked about it, he said this was when it was in this. They were in the Sorrows, and Tyrion met the Shrouded Lord. Now, we have no more information than that. Now, obviously, in the books, what actually happened was that they didn't meet. The Shrouded Lord was the leader of the legendary leader of the Stone Men, and they have an encounter there with the Stone Men, but they managed to get through it. John Connington contracts grayscale. We discover later, but Tyrion, it appears, emerges unscathed. Now, we don't know why George R. R. Martin decided to cut it. The idea that the Shrouded Lord might be Tyrion Lannister, there are a huge amount of theories out there as to who the Shrouded Lord might be, if indeed it is anyone we know. I don't see why it shouldn't be Prince Garen, who was the person who cast the curse in the first place. But I mean, it's hard to say what it could have been, because basically he said, I followed a train of thought and then decided actually I didn't want to go that way. So we don't know why he's refused to say why. He said, maybe one day then, some relatives of mine, long after I've gone, some relatives of mine will dig it out and they will show the world, and then you'll see what it was. But for the time being, I don't want to have people thinking about what could have been in the story. I want people concentrating on what actually is happening in the story, which I think is fair enough. And he compares it to the fact that in early drafts of the Lord of the Rings, Aragorn was called Trotter, and he thinks clearly it was a good name, not good idea not to keep the name Trotter for Aragorn. But that was an early draft, and you have to go through this process of creation of having things and then maybe removing some of them. So if I had to speculate, then he met the Shrouded Lord and he would have learned something more about grayscale, and Tyrion would become a slightly more magically inclined figure rather than the kind of figure that he has always remained, which is not the magic user type, but he's very much thinking about the real world implications of things. And I think that is because it would have just distracted away from what that train of plot that we had going on there, which was Tyrion figuring out what was going on, who the people were on the Shy Maid. And I think that having him have some random other adventure there would have just taken it away from his character development and the development of what was going on there on that journey. Robert Maxwell says, I would agree that Tyrion is a Lannister and son of Tywin. I'm less certain of Cersei and Jaime. Jaime's vision of his mother, she mentions that Tywin dreams that his son would be a brave and strong knight and his daughter would be a beautiful queen. And when Jaime mentions that they are these things, his mother cries. Plus, Cersei shows definite signs of mental illness that are not evident in any other members of the Lannister family, other than Joffrey. I believe George R. R. Martin would like the irony of Jaime being a kinslayer/kingslayer, and the further irony of Tywin wanting to have his family name inherited by a son in name only, while ignoring his trueborn son. That would be delicious. It would. I think the thing is that George R. R. Martin has set this up that whatever's right, there is some irony going on. There's some really good irony going in there. If Tyrion actually is Tywin's trueborn son, then the irony is that he's the one that Tywin doesn't recognize as his son. If Tyrion is Targaryen, but the others are the natural sons, and his natural they are natural Lannisters. Sorry, just struggling to get my words out. Then there's a huge amount of irony that they are the ones who are his trueborn children, but are not actually very Lannistery. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. So yeah, I think anyway, then it works. He set that one up particularly well. Alicat. Hi, Robert. One of the dwarfs brought before Cersei to claim the reward as Tyrion was described as having an abnormally large head. Do you think this poor innocent dwarf skull could have been presented to Dawn as the mountain skull? Also, how do you think Dawn will react when they find out about Robert Strong? Thank you for your stream. Sadly, I can't watch this one live, but I will watch it in the morning before work whilst putting on my makeup. I love finding out what people do when they're listening to my things. So good morning to you. So could the dwarf's head put before Cersei be the head that went down to Dawn? So the background here, for those who don't know, is that in a way to kind of get them on side afterwards, to get Dawn on side after Oberyn dying and all the rest of it, Cersei sends down the Mountain's head. This is what we're told anyway. The Mountain's head, because he dies from his... effectively, this is what they say, he dies, and they send the Mountain's head down to Dawn as a way to sort of try and make some amends with Dawn. At the same time, roughly, then we get Cersei, who's put out a bounty for Tyrion and or Tyrion's head, and she starts receiving heads, and she receives, I think, 7 in total. Somebody tries to make some spiritual point about this 7 being a holy number. One of them is, some of them aren't even dwarfs' heads, it would appear. One of them is and appears abnormally large, we're told. Now, is therefore what happened that they did a quick switcheroo and thought, now we've got a large head. This could have been the Mountain's head. Let's send this one down because we want to keep the Mountain's head or Qyburn wants to keep the Mountain's head in order to create Robert Strong, the zombie mountain. So I would say probably no on 2 counts. The first count is a pure timing and practicality issue. It's incredibly nerdy, so I'm not going to go into the detail, but you can. The people have written fantastically detailed things about this online if you hunt for it. The timing doesn't seem to quite work. By the time that she receives that particular skull, it seems that Qyburn has been working on getting the mountain skull ready for a while before then. So it's not 100% clear, but that seems to be the case. And we don't ever see something from Cersei, as we see these things from her point of view, going, oh, well, maybe I could switch these around. She simply is saying, can we have the Mountain's head, Qyburn? And so there's no reason why we shouldn't think that that's the case. The second is perhaps a little bit of a tangent, but is relevant to this. Robert Strong, the zombie mountain, probably doesn't have a head. Now, that seems like a slightly odd thing to say, but he has the helmet on, and the helmet is welded onto the suit of armor. And this... so it never comes off. I don't know whether it's technically actually welded, but it's shut down and it's stuck down there and it never comes off. No one ever sees it come off. And the other members of the Kingsguard start commenting on the fact that not only do they never sort of see him sleep, they don't see him eat, they can't ever even see any eyes in there. And so the hint is that it's not actually a head under there, it's just a helmet, and the body is reanimated, not the head, because the head has been sent down. So I think that's what's happened, is that Qyburn sent the head down and then reanimated the body, but then put it all into a suit of armor and clonked the helmet on the top so nobody would know. That seems to be, for me, yes, it sounds a little bit weird, but there are weirder things happening in this world of Ice and Fire, it has to be said. Sydney Rose, thank you for the super chat, saying, dropping my question before I start my evening bike ride. The things people do while listening to this. Do you think Tywin is a genius statesman? My friend notes that he escalated conflict with the Starks and resorts to short-term victories. I don't know whether genius statesman is the way to put it. He is clearly competent, and you can make a case against most of the members of the world of Ice and Fire that they make mistakes. Yes, Tywin does make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But in terms of the sort of the high level of the creating an aura around himself that people fear, that taking the house that was at a very, very low ebb and transforming it into the most powerful house in the entire Seven Kingdoms. Managing the Seven Kingdoms when he was the hand of the king, it would appear very ably for a very long time. All of these things seem to imply a very high level of competence. He does achieve at a high level what he's doing. Now, that means sometimes he has short-term losses. The war against Robb Stark is probably a reasonable example. And even Robb Stark, he moans about this. He's saying, I'm winning all of the battles, but I'm not winning the war. This is because Tywin is thinking about the war rather than specific battles. And that, for me, seems to be what it is. So I would call him a strategist rather than a statesman. I think that he's generally thinking a long way into the future and trying to work out how to get there, and not really caring that much about whether people think that he wins or loses things in the short term, as long as he's on track to get to where he wants to be in the long term. So yes, I think that's where I put it. So genius is probably not right. Escalating conflict with the Starks, yes, but I don't think that he, in the long term, viewed the Starks as being the big threat. I honestly don't think he did. So they had to be dealt with at one point or another. And resorting to short-term victories, I think that he resorted to short-term victories when he thought that they would contribute to the long-term end goals. Samuel Leask saying, hi Robert, wishing you all the best from Cersei. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong line here. Wishing you all the best from Australia, not from Cersei. Just wanted to ask what your thoughts are regarding the significance of the final line in Jon's first Game of Thrones chapter. And for just a moment, Tyrion Lannister stood tall as a king. Do you think this is foreshadowing Tyrion's fate, or is it simply George R.R. Martin introducing the idea to us that characters who Westeros looks down on as equivalent to bastards can potentially become powerful? Yeah, so this is it's one of my favorite little passages, I think, probably in the entire series. You get Tyrion, who's arrived at Winterfell. There's with the king and all of the entourage, there's a feast going on inside. Jon is excluded because he's a bastard, and Tyrion is outside and chats to him. He also feels like an outsider, and this is where you get, he comes out with these great words of wisdom about, never forget you're a bastard, because the world won't, that kind of thing. So he comes out with a whole load of fantastic stuff that makes Jon just stop and think for a moment and go, maybe my first impressions of who this person are were not right. Maybe he's something more. And then Tyrion goes back into the feast and he opens the door, and then the light casts out and leaves a shadow, and then we get this wonderful phrase that just for a moment Tyrion Lannister stood tall as a king. Now, is this foreshadowing that Tyrion will become king? I don't think it is. I think it's probably the strongest hint that we have that maybe that's where he's heading, but I think it's more to do with being associated with kings rather than actually being the king himself. And as you say, probably more importantly, showing that this is about the small man, quite literally in this case, but also figuratively other characters actually being very important by the end of the story. That Jon, like Tyrion, could be outsiders and looked down on, but they will achieve great things by the end of the story. And there will be other characters where this is the case. So that, I think, is what is happening here. I don't think it's saying that Tyrion will become a king. Hand to the king, quite possibly, but not the king. I did for a while think maybe, but that's probably just the fact that I like the Tyrion character and I wanted him to do well. But yeah, I think you're onto the right track here. Tim Kane says, "Hi Robert, what are your thoughts on some of the missing Lannisters like Geryon and Tyrek? Do you think there's a chance they might come back? The peripheral Lannisters could be quite interesting given how precarious the line of succession through Tywin's kids are at this point." Yeah, so the Lannister family is a lot larger than it appeared on the show. In particular, we had Kevin Lannister had two children, two boys that worth noting. One is obviously Lancel, and the second was Tyrek, and Tyrek disappeared during the riot at King's Landing. This was a riot that happened before Stannis attacked King's Landing. There were food shortages, but basically all of the nobles went out to wave goodbye to Myrcella as she went off to Dawn, and the small folk rioted when they saw these rich, well-fed people out on the streets while they were struggling to find even a loaf of bread. Tyrek, among several others, disappeared, presumed killed during that. So I don't think we're going to see him again. Geryon was the one who headed off to try and reclaim the sword, the lost Targaryen Valyrian steel sword. I don't think we're going to see him again either. But that doesn't mean we're not going to see other Lannisters. So Jenna Lannister, we will see a bit more of. I'll talk about her soon. That's Tywin and Kevin's sister. And Lancel will also obviously have a bit more of a role to play. He's joined up with the Faith of the Seven, and is one of the Sparrows now. So yeah, the other Lannisters will have a role to play. Let's get on to some questions about the future of House Lannister. Anime lover Nicole says, "Hi Robert, how do you think Jaime, Cersei and Tyrion's stories will end? I hope it will not be the bricks like in the show." And Robert Maxwell says, "Many times both Cersei and Jaime have postulated that they would die together, but in my opinion this is not prophecy, just something they believe to be true. Is it a self-fulfilling prophecy?" Lady Pushkin saying, "Also, do you think Jaime and Cersei's ending will be different in the books, as the Valonqar part of Maggie's prophecy was omitted from the show? If so, what do you think it will be, and why do you think they left it out in the show?" Okay, so Jaime, Cersei, and Tyrion. Tyrion are their endings. Tyrion, I think his ending is probably going to be broadly the same as in the show. I think that he will indeed be the one who is instrumental in betraying Dany. I think he will help Jaime escape in a kind of a balance to when Jaime helped him escape from prison. And I think that he will be the person who is instrumental in getting Bran onto the throne in the end. I think that will then balance when right at the beginning when Tyrion does his cripples, bastards, and broken things and tries to help out Bran. I think that is creating a bond between them two. It was deliberate on George R. R. Martin's part that we saw Tyrion and Bran meet up, not just because it was an interesting chapter for them to have. I think that this was important, and not also for the cripples, bastards, and broken things as a sort of a phrase that which will run through the story, although it does. But I think the fact that Tyrion says, "I have a soft spot in my heart for cripples, bastards, and broken things," I think is going to say he has a soft spot in his heart for Jon and for Bran, as well as for broken things. And I think he might consider himself to be a broken thing as well as others. And so I think that this is establishing that link between these characters, so that when Tyrion and Bran meet again towards the end of the story, this isn't just like oh, never really spoken to you before. They already have that connection. So Tyrion, broadly the same. As I've said quite a few times about season 8, I think we should assume, as a rule of thumb, for the main characters, that the endings for the main characters will be broadly the same. Not the details, it's definitely not how they get to those endings, and almost certainly not the speed at which they reach those endings. A lot of the things felt very rushed in season 8, and that meant that the endings didn't feel satisfying. So, for example, Jaime and Brienne, we had years and years of build-up, and then one scene where they got together, one scene where Jaime tells Tyrion about the fact that they are together, and then one scene of them splitting up. We never see them together as a couple at all, which was incredibly unsatisfying. And it meant that people just thought, oh, well, so it was, what was that, just one night? No, probably, reading between the lines of what else was going on, this was probably a couple of months or so that they were together. So it was actually, they tried this. So that's just an example that things were rushed too much in season 8. And this, I'm not going to go off into the all the wrongs of season 8. We've gone over that ground a huge amount. But Cersei and Jaime dying together, I think, is almost certainly that's where most of us had this ending up anyway before season 8 happened. So I think that they will die together. I am still. Who was it? Somebody was saying about Lady Pushkins. I think was talking about the Valonqar. Why they didn't include it on the show? It was simply because they showed that flashback before the season, where the key thing that they were wanting to show for Cersei was the rivalry between her and Marjorie, and that was what they were wanting to show. So they started the season out with that. And that was the thing they wanted to highlight, and they cut out the things that might distract away from that. So that was why the Valonqar prophecy wasn't included in the show. Now, I think, given how accurate Maggie the Frog has been about everything else, we should take her seriously, that the Valonqar will strangle her. I think my best bet is still that that's Jaime. It could be Arya, but my best bet that is still that it's going to be Jaime who does this. The context will be very different, because I think that by this point she will have been with Euron for a while, and I think that is going to change her. She is going to be much more of a Night's Queen kind of figure by this point, and I think Jaime, thinking that they will die together, I think they both think that they're going to die together because of this connection that they've had. Yes, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, I suspect, rather than actually anything particularly prophetic. They always believe they will die together, and that is that, and they make that happen. But I think that he will probably kill her and then die. Is the way that's going to happen. I don't think it's just going to be falling masonry. I might be wrong, but I don't think it will be. Mara Lee saying, once Cersei finds out that her uncle has been killed, this is Kevin Lannister, and the Tyrells will be blamed, of course. She will mostly seek revenge. But do you think she will have time, with Fagon landing at any moment in King's Landing to try to take the Iron Throne? Cersei needs all the support she can get if she wants to maintain her position. Yes, so this is building up. The very last chapter we have in Dance with Dragons, the epilogue, we see Varys killing Kevin Lannister, sowing seeds of discontent, and trying to set the Lannisters against the Tyrells. He is doing this because he is wanting to support the attack when it comes from Aegon VI. And the best way to do that is by setting the Tyrells and the Lannisters against each other. And he has to kill Kevin Lannister. He basically says because he's too competent, he's too good at his job. There's a chance that he might actually effectively defend King's Landing, so he had to get rid of him. He's framing the Tyrells for the murder of Kevin Lannister. Cersei will, I am sure, fall for it and will try and take out the Tyrells. Will she have time to do this? Yes. The timing, we don't have the exact timings going on there, but we've got the invasion is happening down in the Stormlands. They take the army that we've got there, the Golden Company. Allegedly, we get from the previous chapters from the Winds of Winter. We don't know exactly when the timeline there is, but they take Storm's End. Storm's End is 2 weeks march from King's Landing. So assuming that doesn't happen right at the very, very first moment of the Winds of Winter, we've got a few weeks before that. We're talking Cersei having a few weeks or maybe even a few months before this invasion hits King's Landing, and during that time she will need to deal with the Faith of the Seven, she'll need to deal with the Tyrells, she'll need to deal with a lot of stuff. So I think she will have time to do stuff. You're right, she needs all the support she can get if she wants to maintain her position, but Cersei is not a strategist. She will just try and get rid of whoever is in her way, whoever they are, and see that as a win. Kevin Warner, thank you so much for the super chat, saying conversation between Bran and Tyrion in season 8 that was off screen. Do you think we'll see that happen in the books, possibly in a Bran POV? No. I mean, I think they labored. This was one of the things they labored quite a bit. What they wanted on the show was that the line that Tyrion came out with later, that who's got a better story than Bran the Broken, and everyone went, well, I can probably think of 3 or 4 characters who've got a better story than Bran the Broken, but that is supposed to be a callback to Tyrion sitting down with Bran and saying, tell me your story, which is what happened on the show a few episodes earlier. And so it's that Tyrion has heard this story, and so they're wanting us to do that. I don't think that George R. R. Martin is going to include the line, who has got a better story than Bran the Broken. I don't think it doesn't feel like a George R. R. Martin thing. So I think that Tyrion's decision to make or to push for Bran to be king is going to be a lot more pragmatic than this kind of idealized because he's got a good backstory kind of thing, which means that specific conversation is not going to happen. That said, they are going to talk. I've got absolutely no doubt about it. I think that Tyrion will effectively betray Daenerys, and then after that he needs to be figuring out where he's going. He will when he gets up to Winterfell, assuming he gets up to Winterfell. There's no question that he doesn't have to get up to Winterfell. Then he would definitely be talking to Bran to find out. He's so inquisitive, he will be trying to find stuff out. Keith Brandt, thank you for the super chat, saying, are Lannisters descendants of the Jade Emperor? Could this be true for Hightowers and Danes as well? Okay, so the Jade Emperor is one of the emperors over in the Empire of the Dawn. This is ET, the far east of the continent, before we start getting to sort of Ashai and places like that. They had these great empires, one after another. The Great Empire of the Dawn, the Bloodstone Emperors is probably one of the most famous ones. Now, I'm pausing because we don't have any direct evidence of this, and the evidence that we have about what the link is between those empires and the family we have in Westeros is more thematic and symbolic than plot driven. We don't have much information at all about those ancient empires. They are, in the same way we have some legends about what happened in the Age of Heroes in Westeros, we have some legends about what happened over in the far east as well, but as well as being a very long time ago, they're also from a completely different culture from the people who've been writing about them, the Maesters. So what the information we have from an in-world perspective is not necessarily to be completely believed. But yes, there are some symbolic hints, perhaps that empire was the empire from which the Valyrians, or the Dragon Riders at least, perhaps came from. There are hints as well that the House Dane, as a very specific example, they have a very different colouring and apparent ethnicity to pretty much everyone else. They've got the sort of the purple eyes, different coloured hair, but that seems to imply, and George R. R. Martin has said they're not Valyrian. That seems to imply that they come from somewhere else. So perhaps they are descended all the way over there. Could the Lannisters and Lan the Clever? I don't personally see the link across there. I can certainly buy this idea that the Danes and maybe the High Towers have got links across to those ancient empires. I would say that the most likely derivation for Lan is, and it sounds like very much a first men kind of name. The first men names, incidentally, George R. Martin does. He says he's not a philologist. He's not a language expert, but you can tell where and what kind of culture and a family comes from their name. And the first men names tend to be quite short, more sort of Saxon in sort of English names equivalent. So we get Stark or Strong, that kind of name that you would get in the north. That's a first men kind of name. Mud, those kind of things, and Lan fits more into that kind of thing as far as I'm concerned. There are other people, I'm sure you know, if you're fans of the Great Empire of the Dawn, there are others who do this kind of stuff a lot better than I do. I think as far as I'm concerned, there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on with the Great Empire of the Dawn and stuff like that, but we're never going to go there in the books. We're never going to have a flashback to it. None of the characters, with the exception, I think, possibly of Melisandre, have ever been to Yeeti or anywhere around there, and they're never going to go there. It's not central. It's just a little bit of extra intriguing background to all of this. Is my personal take on it. Sasak saying if there were Saxon names, they'd all have Aethel in them. Well, yeah. So what I'm meaning, sorry, is more the difference between aggression alert, people. The language differences between in the English language between what was used by the highborn French people, the invaders, the Normans, and the peasantry at the time, which you can see in words like axe and ox. And interestingly, the I said this was a bit of a digression. You can tell the difference between the language of the peasantry, the Anglo-Saxon names for animals, pig, dog, cow. They're very short, sharp names. But when the meat is cooked, they quite often have what we might consider more French type names. Beef becomes boeuf, or boeuf is beef, for example, and venison rather than deer, and things like that. So it's that there's a difference between the people who were looking after the live animals and the people who were eating the animals after they'd been killed, and that is and that is reflected in the word use for the live animal or the meat, because of the social place of the people who were most used to using that, if that makes sense. So that's more what I was talking. So when I was saying Saxon, yes, you're right. The Saxon kings tended to have like things like Ethelred or names along those kind of lines, but or Alfred or Elfred and things like that. But yeah, that was what I was meaning, more the sort of the Anglo-Saxon words for things that are very short, sharp, and to the point. Question from Eric Ferg saying, what do you make of Lancel's visions of Jaime killing him? Where do you see the Darry plotline going? So this is Lancel Lannister. Lancel, for those who've forgotten, was Kevin Lannister's son, so a cousin to Jaime and Cersei. When Jaime was away, and he was the squire or page to Robert Baratheon, and he was the one who handed him a wineskin filled with the wine that Cersei used to kill him with, get extra strong wine that got him more drunk than he should have been, and led to his death. So when Jaime had gone, Cersei then brought Lancel into her bed. Lancel seemed to have been racked with guilt over this for a very long time. But a bit later on, as a sort of a reward to Kevin Lannister, then Lancel, his son and heir, is given House Darry, or what was House Darry, which had died out. The Darrys were, it would appear, still Targaryen sympathizers, but the house had died out, and the castle was given to Lancel to marry into, and he, though, did not consummate the marriage, and just then became more and more racked with guilt and more involved with the faith of the Seven. And when Jaime wandering the Riverlands, doing all the stuff that he was doing, he stays there, he comes across Lancel. Lancel basically admits his guilt and says that he's been having these dreams while he's been praying fervently and fasting and all the rest of them. And in one of them, Jaime comes to him and kills him. Is it a vision? Well, possibly, but it's more, I think, his guilt that is just getting the better of him in a kind of like a dream that is very much like he feels that Jaime would kill him if he ever found out. So that, I think, is more about what's going on there. In terms of the Darry plotline, I think it's more about what the Lancel plotline is, and he effectively gives up his inheritance and then joins the Sparrows and is central to the accusations against Cersei down in King's Landing, because he can say, yeah, he was involved in the murder of Robert Baratheon. Yes, he shared Cersei's bed and all these other things. So he is going to be central to that. And Cersei will almost certainly want him dead too. Jessica Jot, if that's how you pronounce the surname, apologies if it's not. Thank you so much. Super Chat saying, oh my god, I finally caught one live. No question today, just got a little better. Thank you. It's great to have you here. I love it when people who can't normally watch live streams for whatever reason can make them. Question from, I've still got quite a few questions. We're going strong today, guys. Question from Bride of Fire saying, hi, Robert, how do you think Jaime will react to Fagon once he knows about him? He could also be one of the people who can confirm Fagon is not the real baby Aegon. Well, on the second point, then I don't think there's anyone who can confirm that Fagon is not the real baby Aegon. The only person who could would be Varys, and it's definitely not in Varys's interests. Jaime was around the Red Keep at the time. He wasn't a witness to the murders. He didn't see them. He was a witness to the bodies being brought forward, but the body of baby Aegon was bashed in so badly that nobody could recognize it. So if Jaime's being honest, and he'll have no reason not to be honest about it to himself, no one could have been 100% sure that that wasn't baby Aegon. They could have been swapped around, but probably not is the answer. So that's basically what Jaime will have. Jaime can merely corroborate what everyone currently believes is what actually happened and what probably did happen. So I don't think that he'll be able to point at him and say, no, you're not, because I saw you, whatever. This was a baby at the time, and he has actually no idea what the baby would have grown up to look like. So how will he react, though, to Fagon? I think, well, I think he'll probably be quite distanced from it all by this point. He's going to spend a reasonable amount of the next book in the Riverlands discovering who he is and what he actually thinks is important in life. And I think that part of this is probably going to be him ignoring this extra invasion that's going on and trying to fulfill his promises that he made to be finding and protecting the Stark children. And then I'm sure eventually discovering or hearing about what's going on in the north and deciding what are his priorities there. So I think probably by the time he actually hears about Fagon's invasion, he will already have taken King's Landing, and Cersei will have headed back to Casterly Rock. So I think he'll probably just see this as somebody who's invaded, and I don't think he'll think about it all that much more afterwards. Yes, he was around in the Red Keep while the baby was killed, but I don't think that, I mean, there were plenty of other people around at the time who were perhaps better able to say it. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be a huge plot point what Jaime thinks about that. Probably just well, it's probably not him, but can't be sure. Question from Mara Lee. At the end of the show, Tyrion was the last Lannister standing. Will this be the same in the books after we read Tyrion's last POV chapter in A Dream of Spring? Probably. As we noted, there are lots more Lannisters going on around. I have hoped for Jenna Lannister, it has to be said. But of the main Lannisters, I think Jaime and Cersei will both die. Tywin has obviously already died. I think that Joffrey's already obviously died. Tommen and Marcella will probably die too. I'll get onto them in just a moment. But yes, I think of that main family, he is the one who will survive. Lawnduck20 says, "Hi Robert, do you think we will see Joy Hill or her mother Bryony in any of the last 2 books? She was pledged to a fray, but that was an agreement made between Tywin and Walder. The former is dead, and the latter will probably be soon. What do you think? And if you have time, do you think we could see Widow's Wail and Oathkeeper fall into Stark hands again and reforge back into ice?" And the first one, for those who don't know, Joy Hill or her mother Bryony, Geryon Lannister, before he headed off, he had a bastard child who was called Joy Hill, and the mother was called Bryony. Tywin obviously saw this as a potential political pawn and arranged a marriage. Arranged a marriage between Joy Hill and one of the Freys. There are lots of Freys, but he saw that as a way of tying in the Freys with his family. We might see them, but I don't think they're going to be a major plot point. The point is that the Freys will be killed, and people associated with the Lannisters will be hunted down by Lady Stoneheart. So possibly, but I don't think it's important. As for the 2 swords, Widow's Wail and Oathkeeper, I can remember a conversation, it's probably a year or so ago now, when we had Joe Magician on this channel. He first put to me this idea. I'm sure it's been knocking around for a while, but the first I really engaged with it was when he put this idea to me that symbolically this would be great if the 2 swords could be reforged into ice, and ice could be used in the War for the Dawn. My opposition then is probably the same now, which is that on a very practical level, if you had 2 Valyrian steel swords and you knew that Valyrian steel swords were the one thing which could be killing the others, would you turn them from 2 very reasonable Valyrian steel swords into one Valyrian steel sword that wasn't made for combat? I think you'd keep the 2, and maybe after it's all ended, then you could reforge them back into the one. So I don't think that it's going to be a priority reforging ice. We've got plenty of other magical swords around. I think the one that's going to be playing the biggest part is probably Dawn, the House Dane sword, rather than ice. Fog saying, what do you anticipate happening with Jenna and the River Run situation with Blackfish and Garrison free and Tomo Sevens on the scene? Right, so this is so Jenna Lannister is Tywin's sister. She is also married to a Frey, and she is given River Run. So the Freys are, in the Lannister world, there's this competing worlds of who owns what, but in the Lannister mind, then the Freys have been given the Riverlands, and so Jenna is going to have River Run with her husband. She's really in charge. It's very clear. The Blackfish escaped. The garrison at River Run were allowed to leave, so there's a whole garrison out there in the Riverlands just wondering what to do. And Jenna, who appears to be quite clever, quite astute, as I said earlier in the stream, she's one of very few Lannisters who actually recognise that Tyrion is quite clever and quite like Tywin. She basically objects to most of Jaime's plan. Jaime's plan is what happened, that they get left in River Run with a small garrison, that the old garrison were allowed to run free, that nobody was going to question where the Blackfish went, and a whole load of other things that she just objects to, but Jaime says, no, well, we're going to do it this way. Almost certainly this is going to come back to bite them. The added thing is Tom 07 strings, Tom 07's. He's a bard who basically says, I'm gonna stay here and hang around and be the court bard in Riverrun now, if that's okay with everyone. And it's like, yeah, who's going to object? If you're going to be stuck in a castle, you might as well have a bard. But he is secretly part of the Brotherhood Without Banners. So they've got somebody on the inside now. The Brotherhood Without Banners will probably link up with, if not the Blackfish, then maybe the garrison. They will want to put things back right. So I think that Tom will be the inside person who allows soldiers back into Riverrun, and at some point Riverrun will fall once more back into Tully hands, with the aid of the Brotherhood, probably the Blackfish returning there. That's the most likely set of things. Jenna, I hope that she survives. I don't think that people will see her as being a huge threat, although if Lady Stoneheart is involved, then she almost certainly will hang her, because she's a Lannister. Anime lover Nicole, how do you think Myrcella and Tommen will die? Okay, I like the assumption that they will die. I agree. Tommen will probably die in some way associated with Cersei's revenge. So on the show, obviously, then he committed suicide after he saw what his mother was capable of, and after Marjorie had been killed. In the books, then he's a lot younger, and I would suspect a lot less likely to do that. But him being caught up in it somehow does kind of make sense. But there's another character here who is involved, and who may have something to do with this. Nymeria Sand, one of the Sand Snakes. Now, she is she's got this history. So she's one of Oberyn Martell's children, and she takes after him in many, many ways. She very, very, very much wants revenge against the Lannisters, not just for what happened to Elia, but now what happened to her father. And the plot for a while in Dawn was when Doran was just trying to hold everyone back and say, no, you can't do all of these things. I've got my own cunning plans happening over there. But now, inexplicably, he's pulled her out and said, yeah, you can escort Myrcella back to King's Landing now, because the Lannisters have asked for her to return. Clearly, he knows that Nymeria is going to try and kill some Lannisters. He's not stupid. He understands this. He had imprisoned the Sand Snakes because they were going to do things just like that, and then he lets them out and says, "Okay, well, you, Nymeria, the deadliest of them all, why don't you escort Myrcella back to King's Landing?" Myrcella has said that she wants deaths. The only thing which will end her feud with the Lannisters is deaths, and she said she wanted 4 deaths. She wanted the death of Tywin, that was obviously already happened, Cersei and Jaime and Tommen. And when questioned why Tommen, because, he's just a boy and didn't do anything, then she says because in order to pay for the death of Oberyn, her father, there has to be royal blood. And if Tommen's already dead, what other royal blood is there? Myrcella. So I think this character who hasn't had a huge profile perhaps in the books so far is going to take center stage, and probably will arrive to King's Landing, discover that Tywin's already dead, discover that Tommen's dead, and Jaime's not there, but she can kill Myrcella, and maybe she'll even try and kill Cersei, who knows. She is going to be quite a big character in a very focused way in The Winds of Winter, I am sure. Jake G. Hi, Robert. What are your thoughts on Tyrion ultimately? Always, this is my penultimate question from my patrons, guys. So now is a good time if you've got any more questions in the chat to drop them in. But Jake G saying, hi, Robert. What are your thoughts on Tyrion ultimately becoming Lord of the Rock? I think he will, but if he does, do you think that Castle Rock still has the wealth to pay the vast sums of gold Tyrion has promised to the second son? And if not, what might this mean for Tyrion's endgame? So this is great. So Tyrion, we talked a bit earlier about the fact that Cersei now is technically Lady of the Rock, Lady of Castle Rock. Tyrion thinks about introducing himself at one point as the rightful lord, because that's in his mind, that's who he is. And then a bit later on, when he's effectively the prisoner of the second son's sellsword group, he, in order to sort of get himself to safety and try and secure his own future, he is forced into paying them money. And he doesn't have any money on him, obviously, so he has to do promissory notes. A Lannister always pays their dues, and he signs the promissory notes, the Lord of Castle Rock. And this is quite a lot of money, and he thinks quite rightly that, or understandably, not rightly, that Castle Rock still has a lot of gold. He does not know if it's running out. Now, what impact is this going to have if he then does become the Lord of Castle Rock? Well, it's possible that that's going to be at the very end, when Castle Rock probably won't fall into his hands, if it does, until much later. I do quite like this idea. They had it on the show. It won't happen, I hope, the same way, but that he gets into Castle Rock as part of Daenerys' invasion. He gets in there and just discovers that it's just gutted and there's nothing there and there's no gold anymore. That really, as a sort of an idea, works for me. And then him going, right, so what do I do now? Will he pay them back? Yes, I think he will. But I think that he will probably pay them back in some other way. And I think that he may well not end up as just being Lord of Castle Rock. I think he'll end up being Hand of the King. Donald People saying, I know it's late for you. Thanks for hanging in there with us, giving us great content. Well, thank you very much. You're very welcome. It's coming up to 1 o'clock. So one more question from my patrons, then I shall pick up on some other things in the chat. Eric Fogg saying, if Euron and Cersei end up together, as I have predicted they will, what is the power dynamic there? Is it a true partnership, or is one dominating or manipulating the other? How do you think such a relationship could actually occur? Well, I think it will happen because they are both in need of allies or something. Cersei will be completely without allies. If it all goes the way that it looks like it's going to go, she will have to escape from King's Landing, end up in Castle Rock, and she'll look round. She has absolutely no allies at that point. And who could there be but Euron? Euron, his plan was to go and get Daenerys and the dragons. He will certainly fail in getting Daenerys. Maybe he'll get a dragon, but he won't get this queen to rule by his side. And I think that he will then see Cersei as the next best bet. So I think that's how and why they will come together. I think that she will increasingly take on this kind of role as being the Night Queen. Qyburn with her is going to be creating this army of whites. Don't think that Robert Strong was the end of it. He has been requesting more and more dead bodies and live bodies to be experimenting on. The Zombie Mountain was a proof of his theory, or proof of concept, really, and now he can do more. So that was the start. It's not the end. This was the start. So she's going to be taking on this kind of Night Queen figure in the same way that Euron is taking on this kind of Night King figure. And I think that this is going to be a proper kind of reign of terror from the two of them. The power really is with Euron, because he is the person who is coming with the magic, as it were. But I think that they will both think that they are using the other one, and that is what the dynamic's going to be, is that they will both think that they are in control of the situation, and she thinks, I'm getting somebody with some boats, but the Iron Islanders, they never really like establish themselves on the mainland, and I think that he's thinking that, well, you know, I've got my queen now, and now I'm going to use her and keep on going. He wants to be king over the ashes of the Seven Kingdoms. So that's where we're at. Any quick questions from the chat that I'm going to get? Cam just saying, thanks, Robert. You are the best of the bunch. Thank you. That's very kind. Quick question. Can't see any more very quick ones. Reflective Rambling just saying the lion sigil is very appropriate, noted for strength and prowess, but also protection and wisdom. Lannisters like Tyland and Tywin ascend with brains as much as brawn, yet they also caged their symbol. Yes, they did, and there are caged lions in Casterly Rock. Okay, I think, as Sasek says, Robert is in need of the nap that was promised. It is now 1 o'clock. Guys, I will be back next week with another great house. After that, I think what I might do, maybe I'll do 2 or 3 more of the great houses of Westeros, but then I'm thinking I might move on to think about some of the religions, maybe a sort of a few deep dives into the Red God and the Red Priests, or what's going on with the Faith of the Seven and the Sparrows and things like that. So maybe that's where we'll get onto in a few weeks' time. But in the meantime, if you enjoy these live streams, then you can find a link somewhere around here if you're watching back later to some more of them. If you want to support the channel, if you want to get access to some of the things I do just for my patrons, lots of different benefits, as I explained earlier, then there's a link appearing somewhere around here. Okay, that's it. Thanks a lot. Some fantastic questions this time, and I will see you again same time next week. Take care.